Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I'll just speak for about 25, 30 minutes about, I think, learning from previous bitter experience about what's gone wrong when I tried to do MRI for the last 25 years on this campus. And I should know better. I was the first person to get a PhD in MRI from Cambridge, but I'm still learning the hard way. And something that took me 20 years before I started doing this is to listen to other people and take heed of what they have to say. So Steve Caddick is the head of innovations of the Wellcome Trust, and he's a fantastic, very charming, unassuming guy. He said, it's all very well doing all this work in your boutique in southeast London. Think about doing something that might change millions of lives. And I was going, oh, go on then, like what? And then he rattled off all of the things that they fund in malaria research and TB vaccines and all this. And I went, okay, right, fair enough. Yes, I can see what you're getting at. And so he said, try and innovate. And so he's head of innovations. And I thought, well, what's he mean by innovate? So another Steve, another very famous Steve Jobs said, well, look, there's no rocket science to innovation. You just have to work back from the customer experience. That's why John Ive, he developed the iPad, the iPod, the iPhone, the iWatch, the iMac. He just went out and asked people what they wanted and produced it. So that's, well, how can we do that in an MRI environment? And of course, I started asking our patients, whether it's a pregnant mum or the elderly patient, what can we do for you? And they said, for God's sake, make these machines more comfortable, quieter, quicker, and this is the bridge that is really the most challenging, make them portable. Just try and do something for us. And so my mum had to have a scan some years ago, and she had a minor stroke. And I went along for her scan back in West Wales. And as she was being wheeled into the scanner, she was going, whoa, whoa, why am I going up to my ankles inside this washing machine when you only need to see my head? And she's right, about 35 to 40% of all MRIs are head MRI scans. And here we have these massive machines that are whole body machines that are jack of all trades and a master of none. Can't we start thinking about making machines that are more dedicated for specific applications like psychiatry and neurology? So that's what we started doing. So we started working with GE, and we'll have the first ever head-only MRI machine in the clinical research facility across the road in the next few months' time. And it's been a long journey, partly trying to persuade a rotating turnstile of GE chief executives to continue investing in this shared enterprise. And I basically, the one before last, he said, give me an emotive reason for why we should be doing this. And I said, well, wouldn't you like to be able to hold your child's hand while they're having a scan? He said, okay, now I'm sold. So they finally got around to helping us to build these with a small company called Tesla Engineering. Not the Tesla that you know, but a Tesla Engineering, a small magnet company down just outside Guildford. So we'll have one of these in the CRF in a couple of months' time. And the exciting thing about it is that it's got a small footprint in terms of size, but also in terms of carbon footprint. Instead of zillions of litres of helium and things, it's only 50 litres of helium. The thing only weighs a couple of tons, so to site it's a lot easier as well. So again, the idea is to make this technology much more widely available and accessible, and for a broader range of applications. So if you wanted to take bloods, administer drugs and things, it'll be a lot easier inside this machine than running inside it as far as your shoulders. So that's where I hope we're going with this work. Now, my mum also did say, well, why do I have to lie down? And she was right. I mean, we should have vertical MRI scanners, but one step at a time. And again, it's a minor plumbing and engineering challenge to turn that into a vertical MRI, which would then mean we could do a lot more work on things like typing, drinking, eating, gaming, whatever that we can't do currently. And actually, there's been large studies where kids have been given vaccinations whilst lying down versus sitting up, and they're much less anxious when they're sitting up. So all of our studies in anxious patients would be a lot better when they're sitting up as well. And the workflow would be a lot easier because you just walk in the room, sit in a hydraulic chair, up you'd go into the scanner and we collect the scan. A bit like an MEG machine. So it'll happen, it'll come, but not overnight. So this is one way of making this more accessible for our psychiatry patients. It's less claustrophobic as well. Another thing, again, that's sort of, didn't stop to think about. We are the Maudsley. We're renowned for being one of the best places in the world to do mental health research. And there we are, hello, not perhaps looking at the most challenging patient groups, we tend to shy away from the most psychotic individuals, the most manic, depressed subjects, those autistic kids that might not want to lie still. But the ones where the pathology is at its extreme are the ones we're going to learn most about the underlying biology. So we should be working harder to make our assessments tolerable of those patient cohorts. So that's exactly what the likes of Anders Dahl in UCSD has done, and we've adopted this locally here, where you can now collect a scan which is motion insensitive. So as long as the person will go inside the machine, you should be able to get something that's diagnostically useful. And if you can do that, then you can really make a virtue of the fact that you can scan someone over time and see the disease progression. It's all very well looking at them when they're worried well and they're mildly impaired, but you want to be looking at that dementia case when they're really, really very ill. And if you can do that, and you can do these serial scans of it several time points, then you can see the progression of the disease and neuropathogenesis. And that's our aspiration for the coming months and years. Just to say that people that don't do MRI on a daily basis, it's safe, it's non-invasive, it's radio frequencies being applied inside a magnetic field. And if you get that technology right, if you can make it motion insensitive, then you can back translate it beyond our immediate local interests to the work that's going on up at St. Thomas's with David Evers and Joe Haynel. And here we have a baby being scanned in utero, where there's a strong rationale for scanning because of poor placental blood flow or fetal growth restriction and reasons like this. So again, the technology and engineering and the physics that we work on can be shared across indications, but of course our initial interest is in the human brain. If we can start seeing these things, you start to see a lot of detail, and there may be some ethical issues there as well. We have to keep that in mind as we move forward. Tiny boring little bit of physics for a second. When you collect an MR image, if you collect the echo or the response from the radio frequency very quickly, the signal is very strong, and then you leave it a little bit longer and the signal dies away and dies away. And these are called multiple echo images. And in our functional MRI, the scan is sensitive to the echo times that you use. So as the echoes die away exponentially, the signal dies away exponentially. You can tease out this blood oxygenation level-dependent contrast, the fMRI response. And if you can do that, then that means if you're doing a scan on a patient that's lying still inside the scanner, you can tease out these echo time-dependent components. So to cut a long story short, that by virtue of the physics, the scan is sensitive to motion. And when you're trying to pick up information about networks inside the brain and the resting connectivity in the brain, there have been a series of spurious papers showing this incredible resting state activation in ADHD and autism, where much of the signal that they've been looking at is an artifact because the movement, so the temporal correlation of the movement. So we're advocating the use of this multi-echo because the decay of the signal with the echo time we know is a kosher signal that relates to the bold. So that's something just to do with reproducibility that we're very keen on. The other dirty secret about MRI, if any of you haven't had a scan, is how noisy the whole environment is. You're lying inside a loudspeaker. And so the real challenge there is that we're trying to scan sleeping babies, we're trying to scan people with migraines or tinnitus, or we may even want to visualize the brain's activity during auditory hallucinations. Those sort of experiments are really challenging inside a machine where it's banging away and making a real racket. So the team have been working really hard about making the scanners much, much quieter. And so for our structural MRI, we have Emil and Toby, a PhD student and a young postdoc, working hard to make scans that look just like conventional MRI scans, but with a completely silent sequence. The sound isn't working on here, but trust me, you can ask Niku later, that these scans bang away, you can barely hear the scan. So, moving on quickly, you can also, and this is thanks to Nick, who's in the middle of the audience, not only do silent structural MRI, but you can now do silent functional MRI. I wonder if this is going to work. See what, maybe I'll take that out. Anyway, that's the background noise, so you can hear the pumps going. So you hear a very subtle noise as opposed to the banging Formula One noise that you normally hear on these scans. If I go back a couple of slides, you'll be able to, let me just, there we go, let's try this. Is it going to play? No? Okay, never mind. Okay, so Niku has been championing the development of functional MRI, looking at brain activity inside the scanner, this is the conventional MRI. So here we have someone lying inside the machine. The lights are flashing away and the lights go off, and then we plunge into darkness and they flash away again. And here's the conventional response in the occipital cortex to that classic way that we would be collecting functional MRI information. And now she's been developing with collaboration in GE the same technology, but in a completely silent mode, to be able to derive both the visual system and things like the auditory system, and she can tell you much more about other areas where we want to work. So there's an immediate clinical application there where across the road, patients that have temporal lobes that need to be resected with epilepsy, well, we need to know their language areas, so we don't resect those as part of the whole experiment or the whole pre-surgical planning. So being able to now actually hear what they are saying and hear their responses, and then being able to hear what we present to them properly, could be revolutionized by this technology, and we are world leading in that thanks to NICU. I can recount a story from some 20 years ago. When we started doing some imaging on things like autism, Simon Baron-Cohen used to be here, and he said, "Oh, let's do some imaging on autism." I said, "Okay, well, give me a hint here. Where should I be looking?" He said, "Oh, it's all the amygdala. It's all to do with the amygdala." So we optimized scanning for the amygdala, and then 2 years later he said, "Oh, cerebellum seems to be important." And then a year later he said the orbitofrontal cortex is also important, and then now we know it's a distributed network. So we would optimize our scanning for that one brain region, and then it would have been superseded by another type of scan later on. So we've worked hard to make what I call a scan for all seasons. With the MRI, you can make scans in different orientations, but with different contrast, whether it's going to be flat, or where there's a strong contrast between the white and grey, and each of those images might take 5 to 10 minutes to collect. But we've come up with a protocol where you collect one subset of scans, and you can go back and synthesize an image which corresponds pretty closely to what each of those individual images would have been that you collected. And so doing, that means you can then be future-proof in the way that you collected data. You can standardize the way you collect data across scanners, across manufacturers, and therefore you could pool data much more readily if you're wanting to do those large-scale studies that might want to link with things like genetics. And that's the aspiration in the coming years. So there's all these different contrasts that you can collect. Now, coming back to the patient need, they said, can you make that the whole exam a lot quicker? And there are a fantastic team in Sweden that have come up with a method where you can capture the whole brain in about a minute with all these different contrasts. The images aren't perfect, but they might be good enough for diagnostic utility. And this is perhaps a nice way to capture that information. They did a bit of a fun experiment in Karolinska last year, where they gave themselves an hour, and they asked how many subjects might we be able to scan using that protocol within an hour. Now, the accountants of the hospital will love this. 30 patients in 1 hour. But they had a bit of fun playing around with this just to show the principle. And we've now incorporated this in our current scan. So on top of our conventional MRI, we actually spend that additional minute capturing this thing called EpiMix as part of the wider protocol. So I'll let it play out for the next 20 seconds, and it'll slow down right at the end. So as you imagine, this is a bunch of volunteers that have been going in and out of the machine just to show as a proof of concept that this can be done. Let it slow down. right at the end it slows down for a minute, just to show that they really were doing it. There we go. This one person gets rather excited here. Can't wait to get in. Yeah. So there you go. So that shows the potential with this technology. And why would we want to do that? Well, certain imaging environments wouldn't necessarily have experts on hand to decide which type of scan to collect. So Rob Leach, one of our professors here, has said, well, what we could do is collect that 1 minute of information with all those different image contrasts, benchmark it to a database for 45-year-old, right-handed male, white male. Does that brain look normal? And if it doesn't, based on the information that's coming back from that scan, it could then inform the next data scan that you need to collect. So it's a sort of virtual radiologist in the scanner bay, as it were. And that, I think, could become a reality very soon. Okay, but for the last few slides, I just want to digress and talk a bit more about what I've been doing with the Gates Foundation over the last couple of years. Back to what Steve Caddick said, do something that could impact on the masses. So, 22,000 babies are born in one hospital in Uganda every year. They don't have access to any sort of imaging capability. Out of that 22,000, about 1,500 could really do with having a scan for hydrocephalus or for hypoxia or for epilepsy. And if only we had a scanner that would be available for those subjects. So, I've worked with Hyperfine. It's a small company that's been based out of Guilford, Connecticut, who are best known for developing something called the butterfly ultrasound. They developed a handheld ultrasound device that plugs into an iPhone for $2,000, so it can be used in the field around the world. And the Gates have supported them now to work on the development of a portable MRI machine. So how is this going to work? So instead of being £1 million, this is going to be a £50,000 scanner. Instead of being fixed sighting with all the costs of all of that, it's going to be rolled out of a box. There are no cryogens, and it weighs about a ton. And it can be taken in the back of a truck. And, because I was giving a talk in Ethiopia, that is at the last Gates Grand Challenge Conference, I joked that when you've made your fantastic Ethiopian coffee, you can just take the plug out of the wall, and you can plug this thing in, and you can get on with your scanning. So here's the box that these things are going to roll out of. Here's the team building one of these machines every few days. And here's the device in the test bay that we have over there with the Walmart $50 stand driven by an iPad, and that's the machine that wheels up to the side of the bed. So if you look carefully at the next slide, I think the chart that we put in, you can even rest your glasses and everything on the top. The field is very low, and so you don't have many of the challenges and issues with sighting that we have otherwise. That's a movie I won't bother with. You can wheel it down the corridor, and as I just said before, it's been driven by the iPad. Here's the images get sent to the iPhone, and they're backed up to the cloud. What's really exciting about this company and the innovation, there's no legacy from having to work with prehistoric software and architecture that one might have if you're Siemens or GE or Philips. They could start with a blank page, everything's programmed in Python, so most school kids could learn to drive this scanner very quickly. And the advancement of technology that everyone now has, I think 70% of the world have a smartphone now, will enable this to be taken up very quickly. We're adapting the device so that it's not only suitable for healthy or adult brains, but also we're going to be looking at babies. And here's some of the very preliminary images out of it. They're not brilliant. They're nothing like one might expect from a high-resolution, high-field machine, but they're probably good enough for most applications in the field. And I have a page here which gives you some nice examples. So here we have our conventional MRI, and we have a subject with hydrocephalus, and that's what's coming out of this new machine already on the prototype. Here's a patient with a mass lesion, and there's the low-field MRI. So it's all very exciting, even so early. And again, one potential advantage of doing this now is that with artificial intelligence and these deep learning approaches, we're going to have some of these machines on this campus. We have the conventional MRI available to us. We have the crude images that one might be able to collect on that lower field cheap machine. But by knowing what it should look like and where you're starting from, we might well be able to transfer the image quality, it's called image quality transfer, between the two and get something that's good enough to be able to spot that small lesion. So that's where we're at. It's early days, but I have funding now to place 10 of these portable MRIs in highly resourced settings across North America and Europe over the next year. We will buddy those 10 centres with somewhere in either Africa, sub-Saharan Africa or India, and we will do the initial stage of development and then roll those out and support those in the coming years. So it's an exciting time for us. And it means that some of those countries that may have one MRI machine, like Botswana and Uganda and Kenya, will then be able to access these things readily. The most exciting thing about working on this is that we're moving very quickly, but also working with Hyperfine, we've made it quite clear that the academic institutions that will be given those machines will not be allowed to protect the IP and screw up the whole business model. If they start saying, if MassGen starts saying, well, I added one line of code to the algorithm and that secret source, I'm demanding $1 for every scan that's done from now on, we'll be taking the machine back out of there. So otherwise, this will not be competitive in its current mode, but we're really excited about how this could work. It has its limitations, but it's going to really shake up the whole of MRI, I think, and thank you for listening. Yeah, and please, not just about the MRI. I mean, please, I'm a head of department, and if people want to ask questions about, reliability, reproducibility, culture. I mean, we had a conversation on the way through the door about something that's broken in The Guardian these last few days about, the senior member of the lab always being the senior author. How does that work? We have a very flat egalitarian structure in our department. We encourage those people to champion their research, and that's why Niku and Emil and Toby's names are on there. They're the guys that are doing the science. I've stopped putting a grant in recently because the person that was really driven the science is still a student, so I'm going to wait until that person's going to be a postdoc in the next few months, and then there'll be a co-PI. I was on a grant last year where there were only so many names allowed on that grant. I was on it initially. We were lucky enough to get it, and the first thing I did is flip it so that young postdoctoral fellow is in that grant instead of me, because they really need it for their career. I don't need it for mine. They're going to be doing all the work. They deserve the recognition, and that's a culture that we need to be continuing to develop here. Sorry, that's a digression, but that's all relevant, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my 2 cents worth is that I think that the reproducibility issues and the incentive structure that drives it is what causes these sort of toxic culture that surrounds it.
Yeah. We'd love to get Zelina to come and talk. So Zelina is a PhD student that's working quite closely between myself and people like Jonathan Grant about, the value and impact of your papers. And what's come out of those, I was blown away by, is how much more impact the methodology papers get than the end stage application papers, because they become the sort of foundations of all these other pieces of work that sometimes gets forgotten. We get a lot of citations for our papers on really sort of like, rather worthy and boring test-retest reliability, but people then use that information to power up their studies for trials and things as well. And we've even had people in the past write the big toolboxes here called ICC Toolbox that people now use to sort of check the reliability of their data. We've been lucky to have industry actually be supporting us in some of those ventures as well, where there's no drug intervention and it'll be an investigator-led grant, and it'll be the same person being scanned 3 times over 6 months, and do the numbers stack up each time, and then people then use that to inform their designs. It's all quiet. Go on, Niku, you can heckle if you want. Did I get it wrong? Sorry, I didn't get to play the sound files properly, but there we go. Go on, quiet.
Maybe about what kind of new innovation your mom is up to, behind the PhD.
What else have we got to do? I mean, I think one member of the audience asked me yesterday, he said, it's all very well to have fast imaging and then have the silent imaging and have the motion sensitive imaging and the portable imager. Can we bring all of these things together in the one hybrid sort of situation? We can definitely make the scans silent in the portable scanner. We can definitely make the scans motion insensitive and silent. Perhaps we're getting all of the things, some of those things like the functional MRI on the portable machine might not be viable. We can't necessarily get it all to work. Because as you'll see from that portable machine, the quality of the signal is much, much lower, but it just might be good enough for what we're doing. I'm really anxious about the AI algorithms at the moment and the over-interpretation. I mean, we have a slew of papers that over the last decade on Group A, Group B, machine learning, distinguishing between the two with accuracies of 80 to 90%. And it's all great, and you can only take these things so far. But people keep forgetting that all of the IP is actually in the data itself. There's always going to be a tweak and an improvement on the algorithms. So we have to be careful and be the good custodians of the original data and make sure that the provenance and the labeling of those data sets is good. I heard last night, I was out having a beer with a friend from GSK, that someone was trying to sell them a new algorithm that could delineate prostate cancer, and they'd used a training set of 10 scans, you know, and they wanted millions for it. And then, you know, you go in the wrong boardroom with the wrong knowledge inside that room, and they'll buy it. So you have to be really mindful. And what those algorithm companies are doing, they'll go straight to the urologist or straight to the hepatologist. They won't. They'll, of course, because they'll be found out if they're going through the experts panel. So that's something we have to be mindful of as well. Hi.
So you mentioned a lot about diagnostic capabilities and that being a big priority for portable scanning. So in an ideal world, let's say you do end up with a scanner that is, you considered it like doing hairdressers.
Yeah.
What would be the first research study that you'd like to do with that scanner?
First research study? Oh, I mean, all of the work on obesity, we can't really do properly at the moment. We can't see what someone's brain's doing when they're eating or drinking. It's always after the event. So that I think, we know how much of an issue obesity and eating disorders is. And we maybe don't shout enough about this campus. And Ulrika and Janet Treasure and people are some of the best eating disorders researchers in the world. We just, only when you look at their impacts and the policies and everything that's come out of it, you only stop to think about it. But I'd love to do more work in that area. And there are some people not in the audience, but there are some superb people working on this currently. Amen. Not necessarily with MRI, but with this thing called optical pumped MEG. It looks really exciting. So there's an MEG sort of technology that's out there. It doesn't give you the resolution of the image, but in terms of looking at your brain activity, that looks really exciting. People have perhaps underplayed what EEG can give you as well. And people now walk around wearing EEG devices all the time. So the prospect of doing more biofeedback type experiments, and again, I didn't digress into that today, but we have 3 or 4 studies currently ongoing where we're training people to be less anxious and less impulsive by feeding back in real time the activity in those bits of the brain that we know are fundamental to the performance and control of those behaviors. Watch this space. Hi.
We hear a lot about the pharmaceutical industry and their bad practices like hiding data and stuff like that. I'll wet the microphone's on, but do the technology companies like GE and Siemens have dodgy practices like that in terms of paper trolling?
It's interesting. Something that dawned on me 15 years ago was that, with all this precision AI and everything, they don't have, they build their scanners in the production base and they test them and they roll them out. They're not building in the hospitals. They then have to partner with those universities, hospitals, whatever, to then collect the data that they then need. I'm sure they're anxious about it. And I think, again, we're slightly behind the curve in terms of in relation to genetics, but in the department, and I've got a meeting after this with the team, are really wanting to do the same for psychiatry in imaging that's been done for psychiatry and genetics. So we don't have a psychiatric imaging consortium like a psychiatric genetics consortium. I think that might help with reproducibility, integrity, scalability as well. And again, that's where the manufacturers might get more involved.
I have a question.
Yeah.
One of the sort of maddening things about neuroimaging is the sort of analytical flexibility, how you process the data, and this makes it a problem for, say, pre-registration, which is supposed to sort of rein in people that sort of data mine or imaginatively how they interpret the data. What would your recommended solutions might be? Is there a solution? Is it a problem, or is it getting better? I'm not a neuroimaging person.
Things are getting better. I mean, working back, people are now making their data, if not the raw data, the statistical maps available more and more routinely on sites like Neurovault. That's really useful when you then want to do some meta-analysis later on. Whenever we do any trials, obviously we register on clinicaltrials.gov, and we have quite clearly what our primary, secondary objective measures are. And that actually helped me more recently, because I went off gallivanting and looking at lots of things that were outside the brief, and it helped me because going one step back, I was then, not plagued by the multiple comparisons issues. But it's getting better. Definitely people have wised up in the last few years. But yeah, I wouldn't say cavalier practices, but people were pretty fast and loose historically. Yeah. Pipelines seem to have settled down now. There seems to be much more standardization of these things. And again, the papers that are getting the highest citation count are those white papers where they're recommending the best way to collect the data and the best way to analyze it, and how it might work on the 3 different system manufacturers kit stuff as well. And those were really helped by things like EU cost action. These £100,000 grants used to get out of the EU as a primer to a bigger thing. And before you start wanting to look at blood flow in the brain of Alzheimer's, let's make sure that we can measure blood flow with a scanner in healthy volunteers consistently over time. And that then produced the white papers that people then abide by. And this makes my life a lot easier when you're interacting with a commercial sponsor, that we're just following best practice on these things.
Okay, no more questions?
No?
No, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.